has been the influence of Ian Rankin on the Scottish crime writing?
Well, I would say here's a crime writer who sets his novels in Calcutta. Your novel is set in Scotland, and I've written 3 novels. 2 of them are set in France, and 1 is set in the Highlands of Scotland in the 19th century. So I think we can't talk about the Scottish crime fiction as a monolithic thing. We could all answer the question. I'm sure we'd answer it in a different way.
But just before we get to that, I would come back to what you're saying about character, and I think character is at the heart of all good fiction, because it's character that makes us turn the pages. The reason we want to know what happens next is not that this is some dramatic car chase and we're interested in what the fate of the car is. We're interested in the fate of the person driving the car or the person who's the passenger in the car. And that's always what makes you turn to the next chapter. It's because a character's been left in a situation. It might not be a dangerous situation. It might be a complicated, conflicted situation. And you turn the pages because you need to know.
Yeah, you care about the character you're invested in.
You don't have to like them.
Yeah.
You have to care about their fate, and that could be because you don't like them or because you want them to get their just desserts or whatever, but you have to care about that. And I think that you're right, there is a huge spectrum of Scottish crime fiction now. We don't all set all our books there. But I think there are some elements of a sort of Scottish sensibility that permeate pretty much everybody in Scotland.
Happy, sunny disposition.
Well, I was thinking of the sort of duality, the sort of doppelganger idea, the sort of idea that what the poet Abir Mukherjee called the Caledonian antisyzygy, which is the yoking together of 2 opposing forces. So on the one hand, we've got our miserable, grumpy selves, so they're Calvinist, we're all going to die and it's all going to be terrible. But on the other hand, we've got the sort of Gael, the singing and the dancing and let's have another whiskey.
And
these
the
things,
Bengali influence.
and the Bengali influence on the whiskey as well, yes. But you guys just drink the breakfast whiskey. You don't drink the grown-ups whiskey. But
Val doesn't like the choice of my choices of whiskey. They're not manly enough, apparently. There you are.
But what we also share, I think, and this is something I think that comes both in the sort of, the more cosy end of Scottish crime fiction, right down to the most dark of the noir, is a sense of black humour. There's something about the Scots that we have to face down whatever threatens us, whatever is going to make our lives awful, and we have to face it down with humour. There's a sort of stoicism that comes from that black humour.
You find Presbyterian sort of stoicism.
There's this gallows humour, as you say, but there's also that gallows humour in Bengali writing and in Bengali characteristics as well. I think in that sense, the 2 peoples are actually quite similar in that, both have had tough histories and tough present days, and the way that the individuals in these societies deal with that is quite often through this black humour. And I think, we Bengalis, we have that as well.
I was also interested in what you were saying there about the collective nature of the detection process, and I wondered if that was connected to the sort of Marxist political history of India and of the state, because I know that Cuban crime fiction had this same principle that you couldn't have the cult of the hero, so you couldn't have an individual solving the crime, it always had to be the team who works together to get to the solution. I wonder if there was some kind of connection there politically.
No, my reflection was more about, in our crime novels also we have got one protagonist who is kind of solving the crime. But if you look at in terms of how you do it, there is a lot of knowledge, collective knowledge residing, and that might be that, the tea shop just across the house, or someone who is your neighbor having a lot of information about something. So that actually is part of our crime narratives, the storytelling. Whereas if you look at you have to rely more on the forensics methods, and where you have got more access to the technology, so that gets more deployed in solving the crime. So that's why in terms of how you approach that, the approach will be a bit different in the Bengali crime fiction.
I think part of that is climate driven. I mean, we live I say I'm wearing many hats, I'm culturally schizophrenic.
Not just culturally.
Part of me believes that. Here, because of the climate, we live out of doors. We spend a lot of time en masse in a community, and we spend our lives outside. Scotland's a very different place. One, the population's a lot smaller. It's also a lot wetter and a lot colder. If you go to the streets of
Not
Scotland,
true,
the first question you say is, where are the people?
Yeah.
They're inside, and that is also part of it. And I think that's linked to this social or solo aspect that we're discussing.
Absolutely. I think if you look at like the P.D. James mistletoe murder, where it's happening, it's a Stokeley manor, I believe. And 5 people are just coming together on that particular day. It was a Boxing Day. And the cousins who are meeting there don't know each other. Their first time meeting. All the characters are kind of like new to each other, first time meeting there. So that kind of and the isolation of that place itself. So that actually, if you look at then the problem solving, what happens on that day, are all linked to that fact that the characters don't know about each other. They're completely unknown. Where finally the solution comes from about one characteristics about one individual, that he was a good hockey player. But in terms of the narrative, that doesn't give any clue prior to the end. Now, if I look back in our society, you will not have close cousins who are completely unfamiliar with each other, or so when you are trying to connect with the reader, they have to kind of find out something where they believe in themselves. So that's where the narratives become slightly different.
I'm interested in the point you're making there about the indoor and outdoor societies, because in Calcutta you obviously love books, you obviously read a lot, you're obviously a society where books are valued, and yet in Europe the common wisdom is that the very low reading rates in countries like Spain and Portugal and Italy and south of France are because they live an outdoor life, and so they don't read in the evenings. They go to the cafe, they have a glass of wine, they have a cup of coffee with their friends, and they have that, their culture is entirely oral. It's about conversation and not about reading. And yet that doesn't seem to be prevailing here.
I think carry on.
I just wanted to bring Abhijit into the conversation about some of the things that have been said, because I think there is a lot in Bengali crime fiction that both supports what Abhijnan and others have been saying, but also contradicts it. So, would like to...
It's a tough one. Bengali crime fiction now and then. One of the points I was thinking about is how the relationship between the detective and the police is it's a very kind of a sort of liminal area, sort of using that word. But literature professor, we're all grown-ups here, we can take it. So the liminality, as it were. So for instance, with the first Bengali crime fiction, and again the phrase is problematic because it actually should be called the police novel, the Roma policière. The French usually have the police procedure in the 19th century. The first person who was actually writing detective fiction or detective fact dressed up as fiction in the 1890s was a retired policeman called Graeme Macrae Burnet, who retired and then started a magazine called Daroga Doctor, roughly translates as the Chief Constable's Office, and in fact started a weekly magazine, a monthly magazine called Rosh or Mystery, where he would write up his cases, names changed and so on and forth. And for 20 or 30 years that ran quite well. And in fact this was a policeman looking back at his triumphs or occasional disasters. But there's also certain very interesting submerged moments in, for instance, the first truly Bengali detective, Byomkesh Bakshi, who was created in the 1950s and becomes this sort of, very big. Detectives before that would sort of wear a three-piece suit and they would come American gumshoe. I mean, they just stepped right out of Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler. But here you had somebody who wore a dhoti and a kurta and sort of. But he, strangely enough, when he first makes his appearance in 1914, around about the time when you that's such an interesting period, because at that time the commissioner of police in Calcutta is in fact the infamous James Taggart, yes, who was from Charles Taggart from Ireland.
That's right.
So in the Byomkesh stories, Byomkesh repeatedly, because he's a novice, he's a detective. The local police don't like him, but he repeatedly says, "I know the police commissioner," and he in fact is Taggart's creature. So by the third or fourth story, you figure out that Byomkesh is actually being run by Taggart, and that's now never mentioned by Chakraborty, but he is indisputably.
You're absolutely right. I mean, when I came to read the Byomkesh Bakshi books, not the first time because I read them as a young man, but when I came to read them as research for this period, one of the things that struck me is just the lack of British characters in the novels. They are self-contained within Bengali and Indian society, and that struck me as very, very, well, it confused me, because they're set in a time where there is overlordship in the country, but Bandyopadhyay does not discuss that. He does not refer much to the British influence. It's as if these novels are taking place in a parallel society. But as you say, there is that subtext. What I was looking for, maybe it was naive of me to look for it, was I wanted to see how the Bengalis and the British interacted. Because for me, that was one of the reasons why I write crime fiction, is to look at the personal relationships of that period. And it struck me as really rather odd.
That is carefully enlightened, in fact, is this fact that there is a British world around the crime.
And the freedom,
Yes,
and the nationalist movement is almost written out of.
And that came as a shock to me, or as a surprise when I was reading it.
And even after Indian independence, about which Bandyopadhyay is very bitter in a story called Abir Mukherjee, Mukesh again is very much statist. He's sent by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel to solve a case, so he's constant, very, very. This is a very different portrayal of the detective from the Lone Ranger detective that you have, adversarial relationship with the police, etc. So Mukesh is a curious variation in many ways.
I was just wondering if I could go back to Graeme about one of the points you made about good writing being the thing. So a very long time back I did a PhD on Graeme Greene, and I looked at his journalists in Graeme Greene's fiction. And the more I looked at these novels that feature journalists, the more I realized that Greene was actually in novel after novel basically using tropes of the detective novel and crime thrillers. And even if you think of his more Catholic hands-driven novels like Heart of the Matter or Power of the Good, they all have an element of crime or a chase, which again is the page turner and kind of is probably behind the reasons why Greene was quite a commercially successful author despite being a kind of literary one. The other thing that was very interesting about the time...
So just to break into it, I mean, that's the kind of what I'm talking about, this sort of rather false distinction between genre fiction and literary fiction, and, because of the success of Dead Bloody Project, my second book, I got asked this question so often, is it a crime novel? And it's really an uninteresting question. The interesting question is it a good book, or did you enjoy it? And some people will enjoy it, some people won't. But the debate about whether something is crime fiction or not, whether these Graeme Greene novels, which, as you say, feature elements of investigation, but Greene was an author who was interested in the psyche of his characters, whether it's this Catholic identity sort of exploration or to me, a crime novel is an event. All novels have events, unless you're Samuel Beckett, and he doesn't sell that much. So a crime is an event, and I'm interested in the impact of the event on the characters. And maybe, I'm not comparing myself to Graeme Greene, but I suppose I am actually. But maybe it's also here is a dramatic incident. How does it impact on these characters who are connected to it? Sorry, so that was my interruption.
The other point I wanted to quickly make is how the rise of crime fiction in many cultures, and when I was looking at the rise of why Greene was writing these kind of novels, if you look at the 30s, this is when tabloids come into their own, and penny dreadfuls start making their presence, and you have W.H. Smith coming up and selling very cheap novels for the train journeys, for instance.
Yeah.
So I think these kind of factors of production, as it were, are quite
interesting for the rise of paperback publishing.
The mass marketing.
The mass marketing. So mass reading, actually. I mean, it's just not mass marketing, but also the impact of the Universal Education Act comes into play, and people are more literate and they read stuff to read. So I think the causes behind cheap crime thrillers of a kind and tabloid journalism have kind of similar drivers.
Yeah, there was until the 50s in Britain, most people didn't have television, so there was entertainment. Seaman wrote for the guy or the woman at the train station getting a novel for the journey. And maybe also there was a time when the American hard-boiled writers that you mentioned, I don't know how extensively.
It was Edgar Wallace.
That thing about Chandler and Hammett, they were probably published for the first time in the UK, and they had a huge impact. And they also had a huge impact in France on the existential writers, like Sartre and Camus. You could see some of that in sort of Camus' style.
Even before Green was the moment that you talk of and tabloids and so on and forth. There is a kind of about 50 years ago that sort of there's a after as you rightly found, the Education Acts of primary education becomes compulsory. And there is also, if you look at, for instance, I was thinking of, because two of you mentioned doppelgangers and schizophrenia, I was thinking of Stevenson and Deacon Gillespie, and how that Stevenson establishes the protocols of of crime within a novel. I'm not thinking so much about his short stories, but about Kidnapped, where he actually tries to solve a historical mystery, the Appin case, the murder of Colin Campbell. So how that 70s and 80s seems to be the moment where genre fiction of various kinds, including novels which we might not call detective novels, but crime novels are beginning to enter. And I think I would really like to. I think that Stevenson is a very. I wonder what three Scottish writers would think. Would be a very important figure in this. Creating the prototype of what we might call a crime novel, because Kidnapped is not a crime novel. The Suicide Club or the Murder Club or whatever, Prince Flores of the Bohemia, they're sort of proto-crime stories, but would you think that they contributed in any way to the way in which Scottish crime fiction would later? It's a long sweep. Right?
They're ripping yarns, they're like proto-thrillers, really, aren't they?
But Stevenson, think about Stevenson, I think the key thing about Stevenson is his versatility. You've got some adventure stories like Treasure Island, which I personally think is the novel that has everything, including an open ending. You've got Long John Silver still out there, you've got Silver on the Island still there, what's going to happen next? But he wrote that, he wrote adventure stories, he wrote dark fiction as well, Weir of Hermiston, The Master of Ballantrae, and he also gave us Jekyll and Hyde, which is the prototype, as you say. It's prototype for the psychological suspense thriller, I think, in so many respects. He gave us children's poetry, he gave us travel writing. The guy could do anything. You'd actually have, if he was still around today, we'd have to hate him.
Oh yeah.
And I think he's really shaped.
Which seems the Graeme Macrae Burnet.
No, I hated me before I was published.
But he's provided so many templates for writers since then, and I think I think he's been a huge influence in Scottish fiction.